"Will you stay if I undress?" the widow asked after the cowboy saved her in the river. Mary had always loved the quiet of the river, the gentle rush of water, the sunlight sparkling on the surface, and the whisper of the wind through the trees gave her a sense of peace she rarely felt elsewhere. But today, that same river, which usually felt like a friend, turned into a source of fear. The morning had been bright and warm, and Mary had set out to fetch some supplies from the other side of the river, carrying a small basket of essentials. She had lived alone for a year now, ever since her husband passed, and she had learned to do everything by herself. Yet the task that seemed simple today became a test of her courage. She carefully stepped onto the slippery stones at the riverbank, testing each one before putting her weight down. The water lapped gently at her boots, but she thought it was shallow enough to cross safely. Birds sang in the trees above, and for a moment she smiled, imagining that her husband was somehow with her, watching over her, as he always used to. But then, as she moved further into the river, a sudden misstep sent her foot sliding on a wet stone. She tried to grab a branch, but it was too far, and in an instant the current took her. She fell with a splash, water rushing over her, pulling her away from the safety of the riverbank. Panic struck her chest like a hammer. She kicked and flailed, trying to stay above the water, but the current was stronger than she expected. Just when she thought she might be carried too far, a figure appeared on the riverbank. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, with a hat shading his eyes, watched her struggle. Mary didn't know his name, didn't know anything about him, but somehow, seeing him brought a tiny spark of hope. He didn't hesitate. He took off his hat and coat, rolled up his sleeves, and plunged into the river. The water was cold and unforgiving, but he swam steadily toward her. Mary tried to call out, but the sound was swallowed by the roar of the current. She could see the determination on his face, the way his eyes were locked on hers. He reached her just as the river pulled her under again, grabbing her arm firmly and pulling her toward him. "Hold on!" he shouted over the water. His voice was calm but strong, giving her courage she didn't know she had left. Mary clung to him, shivering, her teeth chattering from the cold. The river's pull was relentless, but he seemed to move through it with ease. Slowly, painstakingly, he guided her back to the shallow area near the bank. With one final effort, he pulled her onto the rocks where the water was gentler. Mary collapsed there, coughing, gasping, and hugging herself for warmth. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice soft now, the tension from saving her fading but replaced by concern. I think so," Mary managed to say, still trembling. Her dress was soaked through, clinging uncomfortably to her body. She felt embarrassed, her cheeks heating despite the cold. "Thank you! I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't." "You'd have been fine," he interrupted gently, a small smile breaking through his rugged face. "But it's better this way. Let's get you warm." He took off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The fabric smelled faintly of leather in the outdoors, and Mary felt a little of her fear ease. It was warm, and more than that, it felt like safety. She looked up at him, noticing the way the sunlight caught the edges of his face, making him seem almost larger than life. I can't thank you enough," she said, her voice low. She realized she was trembling not just from cold, but from something else, an unfamiliar fluttering in her chest. "Don't mention it," he said simply, brushing wet hair from his forehead. "I couldn't just watch you struggle." It wouldn't have been right. Mary nodded, trying to find words, but the river, the moment, and the warmth of his coat around her made it hard. She felt a mix of gratitude, relief, and something more complicated she didn't quite understand. For a few minutes they sat there in silence, letting the river flow past them. The man kept his eyes on her, not in a way that felt imposing, but protective. She realized she could trust him, even though they had just met.
Finally, she spoke, her voice almost a whisper. "Will you?"
"Stay?" The words surprised him, and he tilted his head. "Stay?" "Yes," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Just stay a little. I don't want to be alone right now." He nodded slowly, understanding the unspoken fear in her eyes. "All right," he said, settling down on a nearby rock. "I'll stay." Mary let out a sigh of relief. The warmth from the coat and his presence slowly replaced the cold she had felt from the river. She realized how much the experience had shaken her, how quickly life could change in a single moment. She had always been independent, always relied on herself, but today she had learned something important. It was okay to let someone help, to accept kindness, even from a stranger. As they waited by the riverbank, Mary's mind wandered to her life over the past year. Her husband's absence was a constant ache in her heart. The farm, the house, and even simple tasks felt overwhelming at times. She had been careful, always cautious, always self-reliant, and yet today had proven that she couldn't do everything alone. The thought made her nervous, but also, strangely, hopeful. The man beside her, whose name she still didn't know, had risked himself without hesitation. That courage, that simple act of care left a lasting impression. She found herself watching the way he adjusted the coat around her shoulders, how he didn't look away even when she shivered from the cold. There was something in his eyes. Honesty, steadiness, something she hadn't seen in a long time. Eventually he spoke, breaking the quiet.
You should probably get home before it gets dark. The path gets tricky, and I don't want anything else to happen to you. Mary nodded, grateful but hesitant.
I don't want to go alone. Then I'll walk with you, he said simply. He helped her to her feet, supporting her as they carefully made their way along the riverbank. Each step was cautious, each movement measured, but Mary felt a sense of safety she hadn't felt in months. The journey back was quiet, but not uncomfortable. They walked side by side, the sounds of the river fading behind them, replaced by the rustle of leaves and distant calls of birds returning to their nests. Mary felt her heart calm with each step, her fear replaced by a cautious trust in the stranger who had saved her life. When they reached the small wooden bridge that led to the road toward her home, Mary paused. The sky was painted in soft oranges and pinks, the day ending in a peaceful glow that contrasted sharply with the panic she had felt hours earlier. She turned to him, still wrapped in his coat, and whispered, "Thank you truly."
I don't know how to repay you.
"Death to the turncoat! You don't need to," he said, tipping his hat with a gentle smile. "Just take care of yourself."
That's enough for me.
Mary looked at him, the river behind them, and felt a strange mix of emotions. Fear, relief, gratitude, and something else, something she couldn't yet name, filled her chest. For the first time in months, she felt less alone, less burdened by the weight of her life.
I hope you'll stay for a little while, she said again, softer this time, almost shyly. Just
"Stay? I'll stay," he replied, and she believed him. That night, Mary sat by the fire in her small home, drying her clothes and thinking about the day. The memory of the river, the rush of water, and the strength of the man who had saved her stayed with her. She realized that life could be unpredictable and frightening, but also filled with unexpected kindness. And sometimes that kindness came when she needed it most, from someone she had never met before. She looked out the window at the darkening sky, the stars beginning to twinkle faintly above. She felt a small, fragile hope bloom in her heart. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine that maybe she didn't have to face everything alone.
that maybe someone could be there when she needed them most. And as she drifted off to sleep that night, she knew one thing for certain. The river had taken her fear, but it had given her something else in return. A new sense of trust, a spark of courage, and a connection she hadn't expected.
The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the fields, casting a warm, golden light over Mary's small farm. The river, which had seemed so dangerous the day before, now sparkled peacefully, as if nothing had happened. Mary stood at the edge of her porch, wrapped in a thick shawl, sipping a cup of strong coffee. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the man who had saved her, Jack, as she had learned his name the evening before. She felt a strange mix of gratitude, curiosity, and something else, a quiet stirring in her chest that made her heart beat a little faster. She heard a gentle knock at the door, and before she could answer, Jack's voice called softly, "Morning, Mary." "You awake?" Mary smiled and opened the door. Jack stood there, his hat in his hand, boots dusty from the path. Despite the sun warming the day, there was a calm strength in his presence that made her feel at ease. "Morning?" she replied, trying to sound casual, though her heart was still pounding.
I didn't expect to see you so early.
"I figured I should check on you," he said simply, shrugging. "You seemed a little shaken yesterday. Thought you might need some help around the farm." Mary's gaze softened. She had always been proud and self-reliant, but yesterday had reminded her how fragile life could be. She stepped aside to let him in. "Well, I could use some help with chores today, if you don't mind." Jack's smile was easy, without pride or arrogance. "I don't mind at all," he said. They began with small tasks, starting with repairing the fence along the back pasture. Mary held the wooden posts steady while Jack hammered them into place, his movements strong and practiced. She noticed how careful he was, not rushing, making sure the work was done properly. She also noticed how patient he was with her questions, explaining why certain posts needed extra support or why the wire had to be stretched just so. As they worked, Mary felt a strange comfort in his presence. She realized she could talk to him without fear of judgment, which was something she hadn't felt in a long time. "You seem to know your way around a farm," she remarked casually. Jack chuckled. "I've done my share of work on other farms. Helps to know how to handle animals and tools. Makes life easier when you're on your own." Mary nodded, thinking about the past year she had spent managing the farm alone. She had handled everything herself, from feeding the animals to repairing broken fences. And yet, here was someone who could help make the work lighter. She found herself glancing at him often, noticing the way the sunlight caught the edges of his face, the quiet focus in his eyes. When they finished the fence, Jack suggested they take a short break. He pulled a small flask from his coat pocket and offered Mary some water. "You need to drink. You're still shivering from yesterday," he said gently. Mary accepted, feeling grateful. She took a small sip, letting the cool water soothe her. For a moment, they sat in silence, watching the field sway gently in the morning breeze. The quiet felt comforting, almost sacred, like a space where nothing else in the world mattered except the two of them. After a while, Mary spoke, her voice soft. I don't usually let anyone help me. Not since my husband passed. I've always managed everything myself." Jack nodded, listening carefully. "I understand. It's hard to trust someone when you've been alone for a long time. But sometimes, letting someone help doesn't make you weak. It can make life a little easier and safer." Mary smiled faintly. "Easier, yes. Safer, maybe. But I worry about relying on someone too much. I don't want to be a burden." "You won't be," Jack said firmly, looking her in the eyes. "Helping doesn't mean you're a burden. It means someone cares, and that's not a bad thing." Mary felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. They weren't just polite or comforting. They felt real, like he truly meant them. She realized she had spent too long isolating herself, trying to handle everything alone, and that it was okay to accept help, even from someone she barely knew. As the day went on, they moved on to other chores. Jack helped her gather firewood, stacking it neatly by the cabin. He guided the animals back to their pens, showing Mary a few tricks to calm the nervous livestock. Each small task was an opportunity for them to work together, and with every shared laugh over a spilled bucket or a stubborn goat, the connection between them deepened. During a pause for lunch, Mary prepared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and tea. Jack helped her set the small table outside, where the sun was warm and the breeze gentle. They ate together in companionable silence at first, but eventually conversation began. "So, you've lived here long?" Jack asked, breaking the quiet. Mary nodded. "Most of my life, my husband and I built this place together." "Since he passed, it's been hard, but I manage." She hesitated, then added softly, "Sometimes I feel lonely, even with all the work to keep me busy."
Jack didn't respond immediately, letting her words sink in.
Then he said, "Loneliness can be heavy. I've known it too, in my own way. That's why I think it's good to have someone to lean on now and then. Mary looked at him, surprised by the gentle honesty in his voice. She felt a connection forming, a sense of understanding that didn't require words. For the first time in months, maybe even years, she felt like she could breathe a little easier. After lunch, they went to check on the animals. A calf had wandered too close to the river, and together they guided it back to safety. Mary realized she trusted Jack's judgment and strength completely. He wasn't just a helper. He was someone she could rely on. As they walked back to the cabin, Mary's thoughts turned inward. She had been hesitant yesterday, unsure if she wanted anyone near her, yet Jack's presence felt natural, comforting, and safe. She noticed the way he glanced at her occasionally with quiet attentiveness, and it made her heart flutter. She had forgotten how it felt to be cared for, to have someone willing to stay not because they had to, but because they wanted to. That evening, as the sky turned soft shades of pink and purple, Jack helped Mary with the final chores. They secured the animals, stored the tools, and prepared for the night. Mary felt a quiet sense of satisfaction in completing the day's work together. When everything was done, they sat on the porch steps, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Mary shivered slightly, and Jack instinctively draped his coat around her shoulders again. The gesture was simple, but it made her feel seen and protected.
"You've done a lot today," he said softly. "You should rest."
"You've earned it," Mary nodded, feeling grateful.
"Thank you for staying."
I don't know how to explain it, but having you here, it feels right.
Jack looked at her, a faint smile on his lips. "I'm glad I could help."
"I'll stay as long as you need me." For a long moment, they sat together in silence. The wind rustled through the trees, and the first stars began to appear in the sky. Mary realized she had begun to let go of some of her fear and doubt, replaced by a fragile sense of trust and hope.
I hope you don't mind me saying this, she murmured finally, her voice almost a whisper.
"Yesterday you saved more than my life. You reminded me that it's okay to let someone in."
"That? Maybe I don't have to do everything alone."
Jack didn't respond immediately, but his eyes softened. "It's true," he said after a moment.
"No, one should have to face life completely alone. It's better when people help each other."
Mary smiled, feeling a quiet warmth spread through her. The day had been full of work, laughter, and conversation, but most of all it had been a day of connection, of realizing that she didn't have to be alone, that someone could care without asking for anything in return. As the night grew darker, Jack stood, brushing the dust from his pants.
"I'll stay the night," he said. "It's safer, and I promised."
Mary hesitated for a moment, then nodded.
"Thank you. I feel better knowing you're here."
Jack smiled, tipping his hat. "Good. Then I'll stay." That night, as Mary lay in her bed, she thought about the day. The river, the work, the quiet moments with Jack. They all blended together in her mind. She realized that trust and connection didn't have to come all at once. They could grow slowly with each shared moment, each act of kindness. And as she drifted off to sleep, she felt a little less lonely, a little more hopeful, and a little braver than she had in a long time. She knew the days ahead might still hold challenges, but for the first time she felt like she didn't have to face them completely alone. Jack was there, and somehow that made all the difference. The following days settled into a rhythm, and Mary found herself thinking less about the loneliness she had felt for so long and more about the small moments she shared with Jack. Each morning the sun rose over her farm, and the quiet fields were filled with the sounds of birds, livestock, and the gentle murmur of the river. But now there was also the soft thrum of another presence, the steady, calming presence of Jack, who had become more than just a helper. He was slowly becoming part of her daily life. Jack had proven himself reliable in ways Mary hadn't realized she needed. He knew which animals needed extra care, how to mend fences quickly without breaking the wood, and even how to coax stubborn goats into their pens with patience rather than force. Mary watched him sometimes, her heart quietly swelling with gratitude. He had an ease about him, a calmness that made the day's work feel lighter, even when the tasks were exhausting. One morning, as they worked in the fields, Mary noticed how the sunlight caught the dust in the air, turning it into tiny golden specks that danced around them. She paused for a moment, leaning on the fence post and taking a deep breath. "It feels different," she said softly. "Having you here. I didn't realize how heavy things had felt until now." Jack looked at her, nodding. "Life can get heavy if you carry it all alone, but it doesn't have to be that way."
But it doesn't have to be that way.
You don't have to do everything by yourself.
Mary's gaze lingered on him. His words weren't just advice. They were a quiet reassurance that she could trust him. She felt a warmth in her chest, a mixture of safety and curiosity. She realized she had been holding her heart tightly for so long that she didn't even notice when someone offered care. Now, with Jack, it felt natural to let that guard slip just a little. Later that afternoon, they moved on to other chores. Jack suggested checking the orchard, where the trees had been battered by a recent storm. Mary climbed the ladder to inspect the higher branches while Jack steadied it from below. When a branch snapped unexpectedly, Jack caught her wrist, steadying her just in time. Mary felt her heart skip a beat, both from the surprise and from the closeness of the moment. "Careful," Jack said gently, his eyes meeting hers. "I've got you," Mary swallowed, feeling a rush of gratitude and something more complicated she didn't yet understand. "I know," she said softly, realizing that the simplest words could carry a lot of meaning between them. As they continued their work, a sense of shared accomplishment grew. They laughed over spilled baskets of apples, teased each other gently when a stubborn tree refused to cooperate, and celebrated small victories with quiet smiles. For Mary, these moments were more than just farm work. They were reminders that life could be lighter when shared with someone who cared. Yet, not everything was simple or easy. Some townsfolk had begun to notice Jack's frequent visits and whispered behind their hands as Mary passed by. They questioned why a stranger, a drifter even, spent so much time with a widow, and their murmurs reached Mary's ears despite her efforts to ignore them. She felt a pang of anxiety, fearing judgment and gossip, and for the first time in days, she wondered if letting Jack stay might be a mistake. That evening, after the chores were done, Mary sat on the porch steps, fanning herself with a piece of cloth and watching the sun sink behind the hills. Jack joined her, carrying a lantern, and set it down gently beside them. "Something's bothering you," he said, his voice calm but attentive. "You've been quieter than usual." Mary hesitated, not sure if she wanted to share her worries, but the trust she had begun to feel made her speak. "It's the town," she admitted softly. "People are starting to talk." "About you being here? About us? I don't want trouble, and I don't want to feel ashamed for accepting your help." Jack looked at her, his expression steady. "Mary, you have nothing to be ashamed of. We're just two people helping each other. If others can't see that, it's their problem, not yours."
And I'm not leaving because of gossip. Mary felt a wave of relief and warmth.
His words were firm but kind, giving her a sense of reassurance she hadn't known she needed. "Thank you," she whispered. "It means a lot." As the evening deepened into night, they continued to sit together, watching the stars emerge one by one. The quiet was comfortable, not awkward. Mary found herself telling small stories about her life, her late husband, and the challenges she had faced running the farm alone. Jack listened attentively, never interrupting, his presence a silent but steady support. "You've been through a lot," Jack said finally, after she had shared a particularly difficult memory. "It takes courage to keep going after everything you've lost. I admire that about you." Mary felt a blush rise to her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from the quiet recognition in his voice. For so long she had carried her burdens alone, and now someone was acknowledging her strength. I don't always feel strong," she admitted. "Some days I feel like I can barely keep up. But I try. I try because I have to." Jack nodded, understanding. "Strength isn't just about doing everything alone.
It's about knowing when to ask for help and when to let someone in.
You've done both, and that's why you're stronger than you realize." Mary smiled faintly, feeling a mixture of comfort and hope. She realized that Jack's presence had begun to change something inside her. Not in a sudden, dramatic way, but quietly, steadily, like a light being lit in a dark room. Over the next few days, their bond continued to grow. They shared more work, more laughter, and more quiet moments together. One afternoon, as they fixed the roof of the barn, Mary lost her balance and almost slipped. Jack's hand shot out instinctively, steadying her once again. She looked up at him, startled and grateful, and he simply said, "I've got you. Always!" The words were simple, but they carried weight. Mary felt her chest tighten, a strange warmth spreading through her. She realized she could rely on him, not just for physical help, but for emotional support as well. She had been so careful with her heart, but now she began to see that trusting someone could be a source of strength, not vulnerability. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, Mary and Jack took a moment to rest by the river. The water shimmered in the fading light, reflecting the quiet bond that had grown between them. Mary watched Jack, noticing the way his jaw relaxed when he smiled, the ease in his posture, and the gentleness in his eyes. "I feel different," she said quietly. "Since you've been here, since yesterday, I feel like I'm not carrying everything alone." Jack looked at her, his expression soft. "That's good. You shouldn't have to. Life is better when you share it with someone you trust." Mary hesitated, then asked, her voice almost a whisper, "Do you think you'll stay, even with everything? Even with the town talking?" Jack's gaze met hers, steady and unwavering. "I'm staying, Mary, not because I have to, but because I want to. You've let me in, and I'm not going anywhere." For the first time in a long while, Mary felt a deep sense of relief and hope. The town might gossip, the world might judge, but here, by the river and on the farm, there was trust, care, and the quiet promise of connection. The next few days brought challenges, as always on a farm. A storm approached, dark clouds rolling over the hills, and Mary worried about the animals and the crops. Jack helped her prepare, reinforcing the barn, securing loose tools, and making sure the livestock were safe. His calmness in the face of impending trouble reassured her, and she realized that having someone by her side made even the worst situations feel manageable. That night, as the wind howled outside, they sat by the fire, listening to the rain patter on the roof. Mary felt a rare sense of peace. "I never thought I could feel safe like this again," she said softly. "You're safe," Jack replied, his voice gentle. "And I'll do my best to keep it that way." Mary nodded, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes, not from sadness, but from relief. She had spent so long alone, so long carrying her burdens without support. Now, with Jack here, she felt a fragile but real hope that life could be lighter, that she could face challenges without fear, and that trust could be given without losing herself. As she drifted off to sleep that night, she thought about the bond that had grown between them, not through grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but through simple acts of care, shared work, and quiet moments of understanding. She realized that love in its quietest form could be built on trust and respect, patience and attention, and that sometimes the most profound connections were the ones that grew slowly, steadily, like a tree taking root in fertile soil. The storm had been building for hours, though Mary had been so caught up in her thoughts and chores that she barely noticed it at first. Clouds gathered over the hills, dark and heavy, blotting out the sun, and the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and wet earth. Mary glanced nervously toward the river, remembering how it had nearly carried her away days ago. This time she wasn't alone, and that thought brought her a small, steady comfort. Jack was already outside, checking the barn and the animals. His calm presence contrasted sharply with the growing tension in the air. Mary watched him from the porch, noting how his hands moved quickly and confidently, how he seemed to anticipate every problem before it happened. She realized that she had begun to depend on him, not just for help, but for reassurance, for the sense of safety that his presence always brought. "Mary!" Jack called over the wind, his voice strong but calm. "We need to secure the gates and make sure the animals are all inside. This storm could get bad fast." Mary nodded, grabbing a rope and moving quickly. Together they worked methodically, moving through the rain as it began to fall in light, cold drops. The sky darkened further, and soon the rain was falling in steady sheets. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and lightning lit up the fields, casting sharp shadows. Mary felt a shiver run through her, but Jack's presence beside her kept her from panicking.
"Don't worry,"
he said, noticing her hesitation.
"I'm right here. We'll get through this together." They secured the barn doors, double-checked the animals, and tied down loose tools and equipment.
The rain soaked through Mary's clothes, and her hair clung to her face, but she barely noticed. Every time the wind threatened to knock her balance, Jack's hand was there to steady her. For the first time in a long while, she felt completely safe in someone else's care. The storm hit fully in the late afternoon, wind and rain lashing against the farmhouse and barn.
Inside, Mary and Jack lit a fire and checked on the animals once more, ensuring that everything was secure. The house creaked under the force of the wind, and the windows rattled.
Mary's heart thumped, but she kept it steady, drawing strength from the fact that Jack was with her.
"You're doing great,"
he said, noticing her nervous glance toward the window.
"The animals are safe, the barn is secure, and the house will hold. We're ready for this." Mary nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and relief.
The storm was fierce, but having Jack there made it manageable. She realized that for so long she had faced everything alone, and now she understood how heavy life could feel when shouldered entirely by one person. Sharing the burden, even with someone she had only recently met, was not just comforting, it was empowering. As the night wore on, the storm began to subside slightly, though rain still pelted the roof and wind whipped through the trees. Mary and Jack sat together by the fire, drying off as best they could and sipping tea. The warmth from the flames and the soft crackle of burning wood created a quiet cocoon of safety in the middle of the storm. Mary looked at Jack, feeling a rush of emotion she had barely allowed herself to acknowledge before.
I don't think I've ever felt this safe before," she said softly. "Even after my husband passed, I never felt like I could trust someone completely. But you make me feel like I can."
Jack's eyes softened, and he reached out, gently brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. "Mary, you can trust me."
"I'll stay. Not because I have to, but because I want to. I'm not going anywhere."
Mary felt a tear slip down her cheek, not from sadness, but from relief and gratitude. She had spent so long alone, navigating the world with only her strength to rely on, and now she realized that it was okay to let someone in. The fear of being judged or misunderstood began to melt away in the warmth of Jack's presence. Later, after the storm had fully passed, they stepped outside to inspect the farm.
The rain had left the fields glistening and the earth smelling rich and clean. Puddles reflected the soft light of the moon, and the river, once dangerous and fearsome, now seemed calm and peaceful.
Mary felt a sense of awe at the beauty left behind by the storm and a deeper sense of gratitude for having someone by her side to face it. Jack helped her inspect the barn and fields, noting small repairs that would need attention in the morning. Mary found herself watching him closely, noticing the quiet determination in his movements, the way he didn't rush but handled each task with care. It made her feel safe, and more than that, it made her heart feel lighter than it had in years. After ensuring everything was in order, they returned to the house, both tired but satisfied. Jack helped Mary set the animals' feed for the night and made sure the fire was burning warmly. As they sat together once more, Mary realized that the connection between them had deepened beyond simple gratitude. There was trust, companionship, and a quiet understanding that grew stronger with each shared moment. "You've been here for me through everything," Mary said softly. "The river, the farm, the storm. You've never wavered." I don't know what I would have done without you." Jack shook his head gently.
"You would have managed somehow, but I'm glad I was here. Not just to help, but because I wanted to. You've allowed me to be part of your life, and that matters to me."
Mary felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and something more profound: hope. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't entirely solitary. She could see herself sharing the burden of life with someone she trusted, someone who cared not out of obligation, but because he genuinely wanted to. The next morning, the sun rose over a farm washed clean by the storm. The fields sparkled with raindrops and the river flowed gently once more. Mary and Jack worked together, repairing minor damage from the storm and checking on the animals. The tasks were routine, but the atmosphere between them was different now. Lighter, warmer, filled with mutual respect and affection. As they worked, Mary spoke softly.
I don't think I've ever felt this. Understood. It's more than just help with the farm. You see me, really see me. And I appreciate that more than I can say.
Jack paused, looking at her with a gentle smile.
That's all I want, Mary. To be here for you, to see you as you are, and to help where I can. Nothing more complicated than that.
Mary nodded, feeling tears prick at her eyes again. She realized how much weight had been lifted from her shoulders in just a few days. Life still had challenges, but facing them with Jack made everything feel possible. She felt a sense of peace and hope she hadn't known she could feel again. Later that afternoon, they sat by the river where it had all begun. The water shimmered in the sunlight, reflecting the calm after the storm. Mary looked at Jack, her heart full. "You've stayed through so much already," she said softly.
And I hope you know how much that means to me. Jack met her gaze steadily.
I know.
And I'll continue to stay, Mary, not because I'm asked to, but because I want to.
You've trusted me, and that trust is worth more than anything.
Mary smiled, feeling a quiet joy bloom in her chest. For so long she had believed that she had to face everything alone, that opening her heart to someone else was dangerous. Now she understood that trust and connection didn't weaken her. They strengthened her. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Mary and Jack sat together in companionable silence. The river flowed gently beside them, the farm rested peacefully, and the storm that had threatened them only days ago seemed like a distant memory. Mary realized that life, with all its challenges, could still hold beauty, hope, and unexpected joy. Jack reached out, covering her hand with his, a simple gesture that carried profound meaning. Mary felt the warmth of his hand, the steady reassurance that he was there and that he would remain. She squeezed it gently, feeling a sense of belonging she hadn't known for years.
I'm glad you stayed, she whispered. Jack's eyes softened, and he nodded. I'm glad too, staying here.
With you, it feels right. Mary leaned back slightly, letting herself relax in the presence of someone who truly cared. The connection between them, built on trust, shared experiences, and quiet acts of kindness, had become unshakable. She realized that the river that had once threatened to take her life had led her to something far more valuable: safety, companionship, and the possibility of love. As night fell and the stars began to twinkle above, Mary felt a sense of peace she hadn't known she could feel again. The farm was safe, the river calm, and Jack's presence a constant source of strength. Life would continue to bring challenges, but for the first time she felt she could face them without fear. And in that quiet, starlit moment, Mary understood something essential. Life was not meant to be carried alone. With trust, care, and a steady presence by her side, she could weather any storm. Jack had shown her that, not with grand gestures, but with simple, unwavering support. And that, she realized, was more powerful than anything else in the world.